Hello and welcome to another episode of Leading with Women by Egomog. Joining us today is Alison Coburn. She is the Chief Executive of the non-profit organization Common Purpose, which has since 1989 worked towards enabling leaders across geographical boundaries and across all social groups to be the best versions of themselves in order to move towards a healthy, productive and empathetic society as a whole. Alison has been one of the founders of Common Purpose and has helped establish operations in France, Germany, Ghana, Hungary, India, the Netherlands, South Africa and Turkey, and has also been responsible for some of their biggest global partnerships. Hello Alison, and thank you so much for joining us. So I've already briefed our viewers on what Common Purpose is, but since it has a global nature, I would like to ask you, what differences in leadership styles have you observed in the different parts of the world?
Thanks, Rahi. I think this question of different leadership styles and how they express themselves in different parts of the world is a good one. The thing that I really reflected on when seeing leaders in different parts of the world is that it's not so much, there are different leadership styles, but it's not so much the difference in leadership style as the difference in cultures that people are expressing those styles in, if it makes sense. So, if you're in Africa or in the Middle East or in Europe, you may have those people may have similar leadership styles, but the culture they're working in means that they have to express this differently. So I actually think one of the really important skills for leaders is to develop the ability to work across cultures so that they can use the leadership style that's appropriate for the culture they're in. And of course, even organizations have different cultures. So to me, it's really about learning to be a really effective leader who has a repertoire of leadership styles themselves and can apply those in different ways in different places.
So when you talk about different cultures, we do realize that different cultures also have different levels of inclusion in their administration, in offices, in society in general. And in this, we do know that leaders have a sense of responsibility when they should try to bring every individual up to the same playing level. So in this, how does Common Purpose ensure leaders become more diversity friendly and inclusive?
I think Common Purpose's whole approach from the very beginning has really been about diversity. So, when we founded our very first programs, we were bringing people together from different backgrounds, different communities, different sectors, different religions into the same program and helping them to think about what it really means to be working with different leaders. What does it really mean if you're going to be trying to make decisions about cities or communities when you've got very, very different people in it and they all need to be included. So sort of at the foundation of Common Purpose has been this whole issue of inclusivity and diversity. And of course, there are lots of things about that are very powerful. So one of them is that, more diverse groups, whether they're in a city or in an organization, are more creative, they're more innovative. There's quite a lot of evidence to suggest that. Also, that diversity brings lots of different perspectives, and different perspectives lead to better decisions. Groupthink is one of the worst ways of making decisions because people are basically just reinforcing their current perspectives on things. They're just reinforcing the way that they already think, which means you miss issues that you should be thinking about, you miss potential risks. So that's always been part of our thinking. And we've been encouraging people not only to be part of these diverse groups, but to take that understanding of how to work with diversity into their organizations, into their activism, into their personal lives too. So it's really fundamental to us. And there's two bits of thought leadership that we have developed which really help people to turn that into a reality. One of them is cultural intelligence, which is really about, how do you understand yourself, your own culture, and how do you use that in the most constructive way to work with people whose culture is different from yours. And by culture, that could be not just big C culture, like what country do you come from, or what religion are you, or what race are you, but what's your professional approach? How do you make decisions? These can also cause real conflicts between people, and means that people, different ways of thinking are also diversity. So how do you use your own cultural intelligence to provide and create more inclusive environments? And the other one is leading beyond authority, which is how do you lead in situations where you don't have formal authority? How do you bring people with you? How do you make your ideas resonate? What are the best ways of bringing everybody together to come up with the best possible outcome?
You have clearly seen lots of different types of leadership, and considering the global reach that Common Purpose has, you have seen different social classes and leaders, how they exist in different cultures. But what is the kind of impact that Common Purpose has been successful in over the past 3 decades?
So what's the impact of Common Purpose been over the last 3 decades? Fundamentally, what we've been trying to do with Common Purpose is to help leaders to think about how they can work more effectively across sectors, across divides, so that they can produce better decisions, because we know that people who take into account very different perspectives have a bigger impact, and produce decisions that are more effective. The other point that we really wanted to make to people is that it's really crucial to be inclusive and to bring together leaders from very different backgrounds and sectors. So what I hope the impact of Common Purpose has been is to really help those leaders that have done our programs to figure out how they can bring diverse perspectives, diverse organizations together, and ultimately to produce better outcomes for our cities and our communities, because they're making decisions that are grounded in the real issues that affect those cities and organizations. One of the most recent programs we've run and I've been involved in is called Sky Blue, which is for leaders working on environmental challenges. And the proposition of Sky Blue is based on, our thought leadership, and on this idea that, we really need, if we're going to tackle the challenges we have, and particularly the environmental challenges, which is clear, we're going to have to transform the way we do things. We're going to have to transform our way of life, and that's no single organization or individual or sector is going to be able to do that alone. So we're encouraging through that program leaders to be more collaborative, to work together to figure out how they can reimagine those systems and produce a sustainable future for us all.
So collaboration and not competition, because people have to come together, because these issues are just too big for a sole organization or a sole person to tackle head on alone.
Yeah, that's right. That if you're going to work on a complex challenge, whether that's solving housing or producing better cleaner energy, or whether you're working on rural development, all of these things have a range of different aspects to them. All of them require you to look at interconnected issues. So if you can have leaders who are more collaborative, who are more culturally intelligent, who are able to bring stakeholders together, then they are much more likely to produce solutions that are sustainable and will last.
Okay. This actually brings up a question. We know that leaders want to lead, and that we know Common Purpose is trying to help them create social impact. But then, what do you think is the biggest obstruction which, so maybe if a leader has huge ambitions, what is stopping them? What is the biggest obstruction that leaders usually face while trying to achieve their social ambitions?
I think the biggest challenge for leaders achieving what they want to achieve is sometimes fearing their ability to do it. So some of this is internal, that we think that we aren't enough, that we aren't the person who is able to do this, but I mean, as I often say, well, why not you? Who else is going to do it if you don't do it? So I think there are internal barriers for leaders that makes them think that perhaps they can't do this. I mean, this is not true of everyone, of course. So that's often one of the biggest barriers. I think the other in achieving change in the wider, social change, I think I'd go back to this point about bringing different stakeholders and people together. You cannot solve a big complex social problem from a single organization or individual perspective. So you have to be able to gather the key stakeholders, the people who really matter in this field, whatever it is you're trying to do, and you've got to bring them with you and find ways to help them to build bridges between one another too, so that you can have the impact that you want to have. But I would say two things. You've got to believe in yourself, but it's a weird thing. You've got to have this mixture of humility and self-belief. So on the one hand, you have to believe that you can do this, but on the other hand, you've got to have enough humility to know that you don't have all the answers. Because if you go into it thinking you do, then you're going to immediately run up against obstacles. You've got to listen to others who are engaged in this issue and really figure out how well, A, what's their perspective, and B, how can you bring them along with you, and learn from them as you go.
So we are talking about challenges that leaders face, but what about specifically female leaders? As a female leader yourself and who has worked, you're one of the founding members and you've worked for 3 decades, what are the major challenges that you have had to overcome?
So the major challenges for me have really, first of all, being underestimated, which actually is a double-edged sword, because being underestimated sometimes can work in your favor, because if people underestimate you, they're not noticing what you're doing. So you could be going away, working on your issue, getting it, making it happen. So it's not always a bad thing, but it can be a bad thing to be underestimated, because it means you're not being really seen and it means you're not really being recognized. So I would say that's one of the biggest challenges. And I mean, to give you an example of that, I led a big project in Libya during the revolution, the uprisings in 2011, 2013. So, I led a project. We went to Benghazi to work with leaders in Libya. And it was clear to me that particularly actually amongst the sort of leaders of the development organizations, that I wasn't being taken as seriously as some of the leaders from some of the other organizations who were there. And
all right,
it took me quite a while to establish myself, because I just don't think, I can't be certain it was because I'm a woman, but I would bet that it was because I was a woman. And there was a period when I was the only Western woman in Libya, working with local people.
Okay, and that's also where the cultural context
funnily
comes
enough,
in.
I don't think it was necessarily from the Libyans. I think it was from people from Western organizations in Libya.
Oh,
so,
all right.
It doesn't always work how you think. So I had to work really hard to establish myself as the person leading, which was a high-profile project, working with leaders in Libya to help them figure out how they could develop, as a community and as a country.
Okay.
So being underestimated.
So from drawing on from your...
So being underestimated is one of them. I think the other one is just being dismissed. Just you're being dismissed. You basically, people talk over you. they sort of behave as if you're not there. That happens less but certainly when I was a young woman, and I think young women face really big challenges here, it's very easy to be dismissed. So you have to really find ways of showing that you've got to work twice as hard, as other people, to show that that you really have what it takes.
Coming to this generation, coming to, as you said, younger women, and not just younger women, young people in general, what is the evolution that you have seen in leaders, in modern leaders? Do the youth have different aspirations?
I see, and maybe it's the young leaders that I see, but I see a generation of people who are deeply concerned with social issues. I think probably more than my generation was, and particularly with environmental issues, which is, and it's often young people who are driving a lot of this concern and the push for change with regard to our environment and how we manage our world. So I think that's one factor, but I think there's another really interesting factor about what I've seen anyway in younger generation, which is that they are they know how to lead networks. People in my generation were brought up to we understood hierarchy and organizational structures, and there was a hierarchy that we had to sort of conform to. I mean, even if you rebelled against it, it was an important thing that you had to deal with. And I think partly through technology and social media, or largely to do with technology and social media, we're interacting in different ways now. And I see younger people find it easier to lead networks, to see how to influence large groups of people, not necessarily using an organizational structure. They know how to instinctively work in that way, which is not true of the older generation. And I think it's really important. It's actually more organic in a way. It's more like how things happen, because these structures are man-made. They don't mimic nature, and networks do mimic nature more. They're more organic, they're more fluid. So I think that's really interesting. And from the young leaders that I see, they're also naturally more inclusive. They're reaching out. They're more open, perhaps, to working with people from different cultures and backgrounds.